are logging on. So welcome everyone to today's virtual event. My name is Sherry Budziak, and I am the co-founder of .org Community and author of 2 books on disruption and organizational transformation. I'm also the founder and CEO of .org Source, which is a consultancy dedicated to positioning associations for success. .org Community is a vibrant network of association executives dedicated to shaping the future of associations. If you're looking for exposure to inspiration and new ideas and how to achieve business goals, or are struggling to juggle your association's priorities and the issues facing you today, or if you need a peer network of confidants outside of your organization who understands your challenges, then this is what this community is for. So through our innovative events and peer-to-peer council, .org Community supports executives in growing their leadership skills and advancing business goals of organizations that they serve. So we provide a venue where you can meet with your peers to discuss what's happening in our industry and to start determining a path forward. So if you want to learn more, reach out to me or visit www.orgcommunity.com. So the reason we're bringing you this webinar today, for the last couple weeks, we've heard from the association community and our clients quite a bit and have attempted to answer questions or concerns regarding navigating the situation with COVID-19. So we know that things have been extremely disruptive, and we hope that you all are doing okay as we're going through some transitions here. So we're hoping that today's virtual event, we developed today's virtual event based on the questions you've been asking, and we're excited to have that Abe will be kicking us off shortly with a session on lessons learned during the 2008 recession, followed by Sharon Rice, who's the Managing Director of Business Strategy for .org Source, and she'll share information about scenario planning and preparing for whatever may come. Next, we'll have Kevin Martlage, who is our Senior Consultant at .org Source, and he will share how to lean into your culture during difficult times. And then at the end of our program today, Kevin Ordonez and I will wrap up the day by discussing where to go from here. We want to hear what you are struggling with. We're going to leave it as kind of an open Q&A or address any questions that came up in the programs previously that we may not be able to address all the questions earlier today. We'll do this again at the end of the day. And kind of hear from you on what other things that we can be doing to help you and help create future resources for you. If you have any questions during the presentation, please share them in the chat, as we've reserved 15 minutes at the end of each session for Q&A. We're recording everything, and we'll share the replays with you afterwards. Be on the lookout for a thank you for attending email with your CAE certificate and the links. And now I am pleased to introduce you to Abe Eshkenazi, CEO of the Association for Supply Chain Management. Welcome, Abe.
Thanks, Sherry. Just pulling up the screen right now. Bear with me. All right, I hope you're all being able to see my screen right now, and thanks, Sherry, for putting this together, and more importantly, thanks for everybody taking time today to join the webinar here. This is a difficult time for everybody, individuals and businesses alike. Relative to association work, this is really the time for associations to demonstrate our value to organizations, not only communities, but the general public at large. I think there's a huge gap relative to information availability and, more importantly, accuracy of information, not only to our members, but to the general public at large. We're going to share with you some of the perspectives that we learned from the 2008 recession, specifically some of the actions that we're taking. It's important to note that while we had some plans in place, a lot of the responses that we made during that time period was from lessons learned as we were implementing. So don't feel that if you haven't planned accordingly and some of the information that we're sharing with you today is new to you, that you can't implement it. There are actions and steps that you can take today that can make a difference in terms of how you are responding and how the members respond to you, but more importantly, how you come out of this on the back end. So let's get into some of the learnings that we've had here. A little bit of background for the organization. I joined the organization in 2006, and you can rightfully describe it as a turnaround for the organization. For about 10 years straight, they had been losing about $1 million a year. Their membership had decreased over a period of 6 years from 2000 to 2006 from 72,000 down to about 40,000 members. And we had, in a lot of ways, lost our true north as an organization. So it really did challenge the opportunity to sustain this organization for the future. So in 2006, 2007, as we were trying to right-size the organization and respond to the market opportunities, we saw significant opportunities, not only internally, but externally as well. But it was going to take a significant investment for us to transform the organization back into a much more responsive, relevant player within the supply chain industry. We had lost a lot of the leadership opportunities over the past 10 to 15 years of the organization. And so a lot of the efforts that you see here in terms of the transformation were really the keys to our success. And the decision to move the organization was as much about financial as it was about resetting really the tone for the organization. So in 2007, a decision was made by the board to move the company from DC to Chicago, obviously not knowing that a recession was on the horizon. Additionally, we asked the board to invest a substantial amount of our reserves into the core products and services. And the board agreed. They believed that this was the right thing to do to update the products and services and that we needed to be much more responsive as an organization. Well, lo and behold, these disparate decisions came home to roost in 2007 when the recession started. And we started to see, as most organizations did, a significant change in the market. And while the 2008 recession was economically driven, and this sort of disruption is humanitarian, driven challenges, the impact is eerily similar to us as an organization, and that is we are seeing organizations pull back significantly. And it's important to note that, as you'll see here, is that, while the recession started in 2007 for us, I think most organizations and specifically associations tend to see an echo effect. As organizations and companies pull back on training, we often see that individuals step up and say, you know what, if my company isn't going to invest in me, I better take the necessary steps to prepare my career and my next job. If I'm seeing my, counterparts left and right of me, losing their jobs, what can I do to enable myself? So in a lot of ways, associations have been buffeted from recessions because where companies step back, individuals step up. And so we started to see that as well. For the first 9 months of the recession, we actually grew our membership because individuals were recognizing that there was an opportunity for them to enhance their career skills and their competencies and capabilities. So we really didn't see an impact from the recession until the last quarter. And that's when everything fell out of the sky. Our reserves were down to 8%. Our revenue went down almost 25% from $23.5 million to almost $18 million. We lost 6,000 members in the last quarter of the recession. The reserves for our organization were down to 8%, and we had to make a decision relative to what do we do as an organization. We were in dire straits. The confluence of decisions that were really unrelated, all converging on cash. And it really did stretch the organization. And so we went to the board and we asked them to stay the course, that the strategic plan that we had developed and the decisions that we had made as an organization to address the market opportunity were appropriate, that we should not change our strategic priorities as an organization. More importantly, that we maintain our investments in our core products and services. And I'm very happy to say that since that decision was made and the board did agree, that we have seen significant sort of response in the market. After the recession, for the first 3 years after the recession, 2010 through 12, we saw the largest increase in the history of the organization in terms of new membership. And more importantly, we were prepared as an organization to respond to what the companies and the members needed in the market space. And so our focus was on, during the recession, and we'll get into some of the activities and tactics that we used, but more importantly, we were as concerned about post-recession as we were during the recession. And obviously, there are specific actions that you can take during, and then more importantly, what do you need to take now so that you can prepare your organization to respond more appropriately after the recession. So as an organization, as we sit here today, we've recast the company as ASCM. We are diversified in our top line revenue. We have 5 revenue streams, so we are not overly dependent on one particular product to maintain our organization. So our risk profile has been greatly reduced. More importantly, we've got now we work in 100 countries with over 300 partners across the globe. The organization has been recognized not only by governments, not only within the U.S., but outside in the international market to solve significant humanitarian as well as economic challenges. And you'll see here that we're currently partnering with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation as well as with the Global Fund in the UN to work on last mile delivery of essential medicine, vaccine, and family planning products in Africa, currently working in 5 countries. It's important to note that we positioned the organization to be responsive to where the market is going. We did not try to predict where the market was going. We were trailing the market. So it's important to note that there are things that you can do today to prepare yourself, but you need to take specific sensing and activities so that you can sort of institutionalize a lot of the knowledge and a lot of the activities that you've learned. So again, I just want to focus on a couple of things. We did not have a full playbook on how to navigate the recession. What we learned and during the recession is that there are things that you can pay attention to. You need to adapt, adopt, implement, learn, and rapidly move forward. So in a lot of ways, this is very much like a turnaround activity. You don't have the luxury of time to see if something is going to work. You need to act fast, you need to be decisive, and you need to make sure that you're consistent in terms of your communication as an organization. So let's get into the lessons learned on some of the things. First, as indicated here, while you need to empathize with your members, I'm going to probably indicate that there's probably a higher level of commitment that you have as an organization, and that's first to your staff, that you need to make sure that they are prepared and appropriately communicated with about this, especially as we've gone into a remote working environment. We have a significant challenge for a lot of organizations that have not prepared nor enabled their staff to be able to work remotely. So there's a lot of challenges that need to be addressed relative to staff. But let's first focus on the external environment and in terms of what you can do. As indicated here, the focus needs to be outside in. You need to be able to understand and empathize with what your members and the companies that they're working for, what are they facing? What are their specific impacts? And how do you want to position your role and responsibility to those organizations? More importantly, how do you get feedback? How do you ensure that you're getting the appropriate communication so that you can make the necessary decisions and that you're not knee-jerk in terms of responsiveness without really understanding how the marketplace is going to respond and how they're going to, number one, view your organization during this time. And let's be clear here, every individual, whether company or individual, is looking at every institution in terms of value right now. Either you're going to help me do what I need to accomplish, or you're not, and then they're going to move on. So this is particularly challenging when we've got a lot of plans in place and a lot of programs in place, whether they be conferences or other events that you can't deliver on anymore. So you need to take a look in terms of what your communication is to your members and ensure that you can support the activities that are being communicated with or marketed to. More importantly, members need to be able to count on you for relevant, timely, accurate information. And so your sequence of communication to your members need to be consistent, and more importantly, they need to be factual. And this is the tough part because we're in an environment of opinion fact, and it's often difficult to discern, are you giving me an opinion or are you giving me a fact? And I think you as an organization can be that clearinghouse to be providing relevant, accurate, and timely information to your members in terms of some of the activities that they're making or some of the decisions that they're making. Additionally, you want to be able to avoid making bad or imprudent decisions. For example, this is not the time to promote how to ask your boss for a raise. So you need to assess what is it that you're communicating with to your members. While a career fair may be a wonderful opportunity for individuals, this may not be the time to promote a career fair for individuals while others are losing their job. You may want to refocus your efforts in terms of how to increase your value to your employer, how to ensure, your job, and how to maintain your job. So your messaging is really key here, and more importantly, you need to be able to, stand behind the marketing and or products and services that you're communicating to your membership. I'll give you an example internally for our organization. We were about to promote a program that we can only deliver face-to-face. And right now, we can't deliver that. So all the products and services that we have right now, we're reevaluating in terms of how can we deliver it, can we consistently and accurately deliver content on a real-time basis. So it's really important that your messaging, it needs to be constant, you need to be relevant, and you need to be timely with it for your members. They are looking to you to be that voice of reason, that voice of record in terms of what can they do. And I can think of no better organizations than really the association community to be able to provide that resource and that common sort of information that individuals are looking for. In terms of the, sort of the tactical activities, this is from the finance perspective, first, cash is king. You need to be able to focus on those activities and services that not only preserve cash, but generate cash. So you don't want new product, new market type activities. This is not the time that you introduce a new product to the market space. So you need to go back on your core products and services, and more importantly, evaluate your revenue streams to ensure that you can continue to invest in those products and services that are going to provide a return today, and more importantly, that are going to continue to provide a return as you move beyond the recession. More importantly, this is now a time to prepare for the activities, but as well as for when the recession is over. You need to do dual planning because this recession will be done. Obviously, nobody is being able to predict the severity or the duration of this right now, but you need to prepare not only for the crisis as it hits today, but what are you going to do when it does start to turn around? So as I indicated before, you need to treat this like a turnaround. You need to be decisive. You need to be quick about the decisions. And more importantly, you need to be laser focused on those products and services that preserve cash and generate cash for your organization. And this really is this is a management function now, for the organization. Scenario planning. It's great to prepare scenarios. The one thing that we do know about forecasts is that they're all wrong. It's just a matter of how wrong are they. So when you're evaluating the possible scenarios on what would happen, as indicated here, you want to take a look at it from a number of different perspectives. What do we need to do today? What do we need to do over the next 3 months? What do we need to do over the next 6, 9, 12 months as an organization? And what is the potential impact that this could have on your organization if the revenues or the contraction persists for much longer than you anticipated? So contingency planning is not only for what will happen tomorrow, but what will happen from 6 months and 12 months from now if the recession and the economic slowdown does continue for an organization. In our contingency planning, when we presented the budget to the board last December, we had 2 contingencies for a recession. Now, obviously, we did not anticipate the coronavirus issue, but we anticipated that there was going to be a recession, as we have every year. Here is what's going to happen if we have a 10% reduction in revenue. Here's what's going to happen if we have a 20% reduction in revenue. I'd like to say that we were very conservative about our estimates. The latest scenario planning that we have right now is that we are estimating a 25% drop from our 2019 levels. So we were at $40 million. We are projecting that we will be at $32 million by the end of this year, and most likely that it will last for another 12 to 18 months before we start to see a significant turnaround. So when you see, the ABC plans here, you need to be very clear on what you're going to do. More importantly, you need to communicate that with your board and your staff, so it does not look like you're making knee-jerk reactions to the challenges at hand. And more importantly, consistency of communication, that you're providing necessary communication to your board about what is going to happen. So you not only demonstrate your capacity to absorb the hits in the organization, but you're reflecting that there is a plan, that there is an opportunity for you to take corrective action to preserve the core of the organization and make sure that you're sustainable. In our current plan, we have 9 steps that we are taking, that we need to take as an organization. We are on step number 5 of 9. And number 9 is a reduction in force. We hope we don't get there. So the first 5 steps have already been implemented, and the board knows exactly what the next steps are going to be, as well as the staff know what the next steps are going to be. We share this across the organization. We want to make sure that the board, the finance committee, as well as the staff understand the contingency plans, and more importantly, what are the triggers that we are going to use to start to implement these contingency plans. More importantly, it starts to engender trust between you, the staff, the board, and the community at large, that you are prepared as an organization. And so again, it's not too late if you haven't developed them. It is now the time to start putting those plans in place, and more importantly, start to communicate out. So first, develop the plan and then stick to it. It is one of the challenges that you have is that, okay, here's the plan, and then when the crisis hits, you throw out the plan and everybody starts to, take very drastic or draconian actions that are not consistent with your contingency plans. You don't develop trust that way. So one of the things that you need to do is ensure that everybody is communicated with on a consistent, accurate basis about what your actions are today, what your actions are going to be tomorrow, and what are the triggers necessary for you to start activities that will be a little bit more, I would say, severe in terms of the actions that you're taking. As I indicated before, if cash is king, data is the queen. There is no substitute for having accurate information about what are the key indicators for your organization to take the necessary steps. So more importantly, what are you paying attention to? We've indicated a number of key indicators that organizations will take a look at. Obviously, you have to do it relative to your core products and services, but you need accurate real-time data so you can start to see how organizations or individuals are responding to either the marketing and or communication channels that you have. More importantly, what actions can you take? So as you're getting more information and key indicators in terms of how the market is moving, it could start to drive what actions you need to take. So do you need to enhance certain communications, or do you need to pull back on other communications? But it's really important that you have a monitoring system that provides you real-time information so that you can make informed decisions about the actions necessary for your organization. And more importantly, communication. And you've heard this over and over again. You need to over-communicate with your staff. You need to over-communicate with your board to make sure that they understand that you are on top of this. This is the time for leadership. There is no greater time than in a crisis when leadership has to demonstrate their capacity to not only empathize with what individuals and your members are going through, but more importantly, to demonstrate that you have the core capabilities and the resources and the individuals, specifically teams, necessary to get you through to this. It will end, but more importantly, what you do during this time will have a significant impact on how organizations view your organizations moving out of this. As I indicated before, cash is king. So in terms of managing your cash flow, this is where your CFO needs to step up and take leadership on evaluating where the organization can preserve cash, and more importantly, how can it generate cash. So how much are you willing to invest of your reserves? How much are you willing to offer free in terms of the marketplace? What are you willing to delay in terms of payments to your vendors? And understand something, that also the members and their companies are making the same decisions about you. So they're evaluating your, bills and your payment structures and say, wait a second, can you help me during this time? Can you, reduce my my membership dues? Can you make it easier for me to belong to your organization? You need to be very careful, because there are opportunities that you can take advantage of today where companies need your resources and your programming and are willing to pay for them. And at the same time, you're developing programs and services where you're giving away a lot of your value. You need to be careful to ensure that what you're giving away is not damaging where organizations and individuals are willing to pay 100% for. So this is a core evaluation, or this is an evaluation of your core products and services to identify what can be delivered into the marketplace today at its current state, what needs to be either reduced in terms of its scope or its price, and more importantly, what is going to happen as you make these decisions. These are not happening in a vacuum. So if you're offering, for example, 6 months free membership, how does that relate to an individual who's trying to, or is considering renewing his membership? He's looking at you and saying, wait a second here, I got to pay a full year, but a new member gets 6 months for free? So you need to evaluate your communication to make sure that you're consistent in terms of what your approach is to the market. And more importantly, you need to understand the pros and cons of either reinvesting your reserves, or more importantly, where can you access cash so that you can preserve as much as possible the core of the organization, to make sure that you're sustainable, and on the backside that you're able to thrive as an organization. We started the conversation here that it's the number one priority that you have is your staff, not only in terms of health and safety, but in terms of retaining your key resources for the organization. As indicated here, you need to make sure that you don't have any surprises for your staff or for organization. You need to ensure that the communication that you have with them is consistent and is not to be perceived from an alarmist perspective, but you also need to be accurate about what we share with them. You need to ensure that everybody is informed and is engaged, especially your remote employees. We're in a period right now where individuals and a lot of organizations had not planned for remote operations of the organizations for a week, let alone a month or 2 months as an organization. So you need to start enabling and sharing with your teams about how to work remotely and how to manage remotely for your the directors and your managers. This is going to be a difficult time for a lot of individuals, especially if they've got families who are cooped up with them or in a confined space, and they're trying to find time to do their work while managing a family situation. So this is not a one-size-fits-all, but more importantly, you need to ensure that there are no surprises for your board. You need to ensure there are no surprises for your staff. And this is probably a good sort of mantra to have as you're going through this. Try to be as upfront as possible and try to be as transparent as possible with your key stakeholders, and ensure that you have a communication plan and a sequence and a cadence of communication with your key stakeholders. More importantly, empathize with your members. Try to put yourself in their situation and understand what they're going through, and more importantly, what would you look for from an association to help them not only get into a new business environment, but more importantly, how they can maintain and hopefully thrive at the backside of this. There is no secret formula to this other than being a upfront and a clear concise communication channel for your members and for their co-organizations as well. Lastly, and there's no way to tell when this will be done, but it will be done. And our only hope is that the humanitarian crisis subsides fairly quickly, and then we can get back to the business and repairing a lot of the damage that had been done to our economy. We view this as an opportunity. As much as we view this as a shock to the system, we also view this as a significant opportunity for our organization. We truly believe that on the backside of this, that we will be much stronger as an organization because of the actions that we take today. We are not waiting for the turnaround. We're planning for the turnaround today while we're taking necessary steps to ensure that we're sustainable as an organization and that we can see a tomorrow. So the duality of this is challenging for a lot of individuals, and that we're talking about short-term tactics and activities to preserve the core of the organization, while at the same time telling you that you need to plan for the backside of the recession, because there will be a backside, and that you will need to position your organization to take advantage of the need that individuals and members are going to have in the turnaround. In our particular industry, I can think of no greater time than supply chain is today, that is on everybody's lips in terms of what the impact is going to be, whether in stockouts or whether in production or whether in short or long-term impacts. So while we think this is a great time for us, we're also forecasting a reduction of revenue of 25%. So we fully anticipate that by the end of this year, we'll be down to about $32 million as an organization. We've taken the necessary steps as an organization to preserve cash, and that we are now executing on the plan. But more importantly, we're learning, adapting, and adopting to the changes in the market space, because this current disruption is unlike any other disruption that we've seen. But there are lessons to be learned from these activities, and more importantly, what you do today and what you do tomorrow will have a significant impact on the sustainability and on your capacity as an organization to remain relevant. This will be done, and our hope is that it's done sooner than later, and that the association world and the economic as well as the humanitarian world will learn and will adapt and adopt to a very different economic environment than we're facing today. But you should take to heart that we will see our way through this. The working from home has challenged a lot of organizations. On a side note, I find myself taking calls from telemarketers and being willing to talk to them on the phone. So there are some unusual activities that individuals are going to be faced with over the next few days. So while this is a dire situation, understand that this is the time for associations to demonstrate their value and their worth as an organization. I can think of no better time than associations demonstrating their value than today. This is where organizations and individuals are looking to be a voice of reason, and more importantly, a voice for accurate and timely and relevant information. I want to thank everybody for taking time today, and I know that we'll have some time for questions if anybody has any. Thanks again.
Thanks so much, Abe, for sharing your experience and knowledge. We're getting some messages from people really appreciating the content and saying that was amazing content that you shared with us today. So we really appreciate it. We do have a few questions. As you were talking about remote work, I've been saying this week that I've had a remote office, and all of our consultants have been remote for 15 years. But the fact that there's other people now in the house with me during the normal school day is not my situation. So
yeah.
And they're older kids, so yeah, the disruption is pretty significant. So one of our participants asked, they said, we've heard from some of our members that we're receiving so many emails and communications that they are asking their association to pull back on the amount of communication. Everyone is being flooded from information from all outlets. How should we think about this? Is the root cause the content of the communication, or not thinking enough about what members really need?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think you need to, again, put yourself in the member shoes and take a look at the communication that you are sending to them. So if you haven't already identified what your marketing communication sort of schedule is, you need to take a look at it today and start to pull back on those activities or those communications that really don't, that isn't relevant today. It may be relevant a month from now or 2 months from now, but focus on the information that your members need today. Also, consider that maybe having a website or a dedicated page on your web, on your landing page for individuals to go specifically for the issue on the coronavirus or the COVID-19, so that you can put all the communications in there, and then you just need to update it on that site as opposed to flooding the members with every piece of information that you can get out there. So I would say there is information overload, and that's why you need to really lean on your communication channel and your marketing teams to be concise, be relevant, and be timely. And so use a couple of, again, you need to use filters that are relevant for your members in terms of what do they want to hear, how often do they want to hear about it, and whom do they want to hear from this.
Great. So another question is, with all your lessons learned, which one do you think was the most important to help you rebound after the recession?
Staying the course. That would indicate that you had a qualified strategic plan. So again, you have to use, the what if scenario. Okay, so what if this happens? So you need to have the necessary plans in place. Now, what happens when you don't? And I think this is the challenge that you have. If you have a qualified strategic plan, it's easy to stick to it, albeit you have to make course corrections. The challenge is when the strategic plan that you had is so far gone right now that you need to take very drastic actions. And this is when you need to get your management team together and take a look at what is it that creates value for your organization today. And so the planning that is required for this on a short-term basis, you need to treat it like a turnaround. And for those of you that have not been in a turnaround environment, you need to evaluate the situation rapidly. You need to ensure that you make a decisive decision. You need to make sure that you can learn from the impact of the decision that you've made and course correct immediately. You do not have the luxury of time. And so you need to learn quick. You need to learn and, adopt and adapt and implement and modify on a consistent basis. This requires a high level of communication within a core group of individuals, but then you need to be able to disseminate those decisions out fairly quickly. So one of the challenges that you have is that as you're making course correction, that you don't communicate this out to your staff or to your board, and then on the backside, you're having to explain why you made the decision as opposed to bringing them into the process. That doesn't mean that you're sharing everything with them, but you're showing that there is a plan. You're showing them consistency in terms of your actions, and more importantly, that you have the control and the opportunity to respond to the challenges into the market, either internal or external to the organization.
Great, thanks. So Abe, we have a question from our friend Don D. He said, in the 25% reduction in revenue, does this include consideration for bridges for members in terms of dues or event helpers? Are you looking at direct help financially wise for members and their employees?
If I understand the question, it's, is this impacting the 25% reduction? Is it across the board, or are we seeing in particular areas? Is that?
Yeah, so does it include consideration for bridges for members in terms of dues or events?
Yeah, okay. In terms of some of the actions that we're taking, yeah, it does include the, accommodations that we're making for individuals as well as for organizations. So we are a hybrid in terms of our membership. We have corporate members as well as individual members, and we're making the necessary accommodations for the companies as well as for the individuals to demonstrate our commitment to them during this time. So one of the things that we often rail against is what happens during the next recession. Have organizations learned that you can't turn professional development on and off? And so we're seeing a lot of organizations pull back on their training or their memberships today, and we don't view them as a lost cause. we view them as a commitment that we need to ensure that we walk the talk. So we expect them to demonstrate value in positive economic conditions as well as negative. So here we are in a negative economic conditions. They've pulled back. We are finding ways to create value and resources for them, even though they're not members, and at marginally zero cost. So what we're doing is maintaining our contact with them, but we know we're going to take the financial hit. But more importantly, I'm trying to demonstrate to the organization, hey, look, we ask you to commit to your staff and your organization and your workforce, irrespective of market conditions. We're going to do the same thing. So we're trying to be consistent in terms of our communication, in terms of what we expect from them and what they can expect from us.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Abe. We do, a couple of the executive directors asked if we'll be sharing these slides so they could share the framework with their boards, and we will be doing that as a follow-up email, so watch for that. So Abe, again, thank you very much. To stay on time, I think we'll transition over to Sharon to talk about scenario planning and preparing for whatever may come. So again, we really appreciate your presentation and you staying to ask some questions.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Abe. I'm really excited to be able to talk to you today and especially follow Abe because we were working together at APEX during the 2008 recession. So you're going to see in my presentation a lot of kind of methodology demonstration of things that we did at APEX during the recession and how we learned to do scenario planning as a part of that experience. So what is scenario planning? You know, in the best of times, scenario planning is really a process that supports long-term planning. So we try to conceive potential futures and these futures that we would want to plan for in our strategic plan. However, we can also use strategic planning during times of crises. And we're hearing this motto a lot right now, hope for the best and plan for the worst. What scenario planning does is it fills you with information, it fills you with an understanding of the possibilities, and it gives you some control when you otherwise feel like you're completely out of control, that your external environment is changing around you, and still people are looking to you for leadership and understanding and a path forward. So the process of scenario planning then can really give us a sense of an understanding of what the potential futures are. It guides our actions. It gives us control over what we're doing as opposed to being just completely reactive to the situation. Now, scenario planning typically is a rather complex process, especially when it's supporting long-term planning. But what I've done here is put together a methodology that I would call maybe just-in-time scenario planning. So it's something that you can implement with relatively low overhead. You can get a lot done in a short time. So if you're feeling right now like you're behind and you're in a reactive mode, the process I'm going to go through with you today you'll be able to implement that and then start to feel like you're maybe in control again, at least of what you're doing internally. So the most important thing I think about scenario planning is that it gives us answers. And that's really what we're looking for right now. When we can't trust what information is out there necessarily because, and this is part of the problem with COVID-19, right? We have a lot of data, but we don't have enough data to say what's the trajectory of that going to be? How long is it going to last? How long is it going to be making an impact on us? So when we do scenario plannings, we start to get some answers and some sense of, as I said, again, control. So why are we engaging in scenario planning right now? What are the drivers? What's the condition? What are the factors that are driving the uncertainty that we're experiencing, and how impactful could those factors be on our business? What's the potential short, midterm, and long-term impact? So Abe talked about this, where we looked during the 2008 recession of what's happening in the short term, how we need to respond sometimes in the midterm, and how we can change the conversation in the long term so that we're able to come out of the recession or out of the COVID crisis in pretty good shape and allow us to be able to move forward and improve our sustainability. We need to be able, through scenario planning, to determine what the possible scenarios are that we're facing. So we're going to land on some of the scenarios. And then also how we'll monitor our environment to know what scenario is coming to fruition. And they've talked a little bit about this in the lessons learned. So what are our key indicators that we're moving towards specific scenarios? And then finally, what our strategy will be for operating under the scenario. And again, how do we monitor the success of that strategy? So I have a little bit of a disclaimer here. Number one is that to be effective, scenario planning should be very specific to your industry or your profession that the association represents. So we are often tempted to look at frameworks and information that people put out, or we'll ask our association colleagues from other associations to share what they're doing with us. And what I want to say is, especially with scenario planning, there's not a one-size-fits-all. So you can look at what other people are doing and then say that applies or it doesn't apply to us and adopt it. And I think that's really a good way to get your brain working and start thinking about what's going to impact you. But I just want to caution you to say that the scenario planning is not a process that somebody else can do for you. You have to go through it yourself. It's something that you have to do. Now, I'm providing you today some very specific illustrations to COVID-19 crisis and the recession. And again, this is a very high level thinking. I'm only providing these examples for illustration of how this would work, but you hopefully can apply the methodology and not so much the data that I'm giving you here. All right, so let's start going through the questions. Why are we engaging in scenario planning? Scenario planning is part of what we do to be transparent with our staff and our leadership. So everybody has to understand when you're starting scenario planning why you're actually doing it. And I've got a statement here, and I'll just read that very quickly. Today, we are facing two separate but related challenges to the way we do business, COVID-19 and the potential of a global recession. These events are likely to have a profound impact on our members, customers, staff, leaders, and the entire association in the short and the midterm. There are likely going to be long-term consequences as well. Our goal in scenario planning is to fully explore the possible impact of these events and develop a plan that will support us in making decisions for our association. So these dual events are part of, as Abe says, what makes this a very different crisis than what we experienced in 2008. So we've got the humanitarian crisis and we have the economic crisis. They are related, although there was some projection of recession, just course correcting recession anyway. So I know a number of you were following that and potentially planning for a down year. But this is extraordinary. This is not something that we really were planning for. And so looking at those two crises put us in really a unique situation. And there's a lot of lessons learned from 2008, but understand that this is also different. And so the scenario planning has to take both COVID-19 crisis, the humanitarian crisis, and the financial crisis into consideration. So what factors are driving the uncertainty and how impactful will they be? So what we want to do in this kind of first step, or second step after defining why we're doing scenario planning, engaging in scenario planning, we want to start by looking at the factors. And this is something often that a CEO or an executive team will do, will go through, and if you're blessed with a research department, maybe they'll help with this, but you want to line up here what's possibly happening here. And you are starting to say, how does this impact our members and their companies, their employers? And we're not really talking about how it's impacting the association yet. We're saying these are drivers that are impacting our business. So this is a good kind of a research exercise. So for example, I've broken these key factors, these drivers, into two categories, the COVID-19 and the global recession. And so under COVID-19, some of the kinds of factors you might be looking at are government policy and mandates affecting business operation, our members' availability to engage. So if you're a healthcare association executive, one of the things you're watching right now, especially an MD-based group, is what are your members focusing on? Are they going to have time to focus on association activities? Probably not in the short term. So we see that dynamic that's going to drive our business, that's going to have an impact on our business. Staff availability. To manage and to process as we make this, and this is hopefully a short-term impact, but as we make this transition this week to working remotely, staff have to be able to adjust to that, and our systems have to be able to support that. So that's a driver, that's an impact. Company support for non-essential activity. So what companies are telling their members. And we saw a lot of this with event cancellation, that the companies were pulling back travel before the government said we couldn't congregate. And we went through stages of groups, and I think it might be down to 10 right now, I'm not sure. But companies were saying, no, we're not going to allow our staff to travel. We saw that with hospitals and physician organizations saying, no, can't travel. Related drivers to the global recession, obviously we've got pretty important stock market indicators that were occurring last week and this week still, interest rates, member interest or ability to invest in association core services. In a traditional, just demand-driven recession like 2018, we would have a possibility that members would want to invest in our core products and services. That may be less likely right now with the uncertainty. And so if member support starts to wane for association activity, so companies are saying, companies are saying, right now we're cutting these budgets, these education budgets, or conference budgets, or engagement membership budgets. That's going to be a driver on you as well. So factors in general are external to the association, but impact the association. And you want to get a good understanding of these and a list. And this is something, by the way, and I'll talk about this a little bit at the end, but this needs to be evergreen. So you'll see more and more drivers coming through that impact your business, and you'll keep this up to date. After you have your list of drivers, you're going to go through an exercise to really assess their importance, the impact they're going to make, and the level of uncertainty related to that driver. And I think that this is really similar as an exercise to risk planning. So if you've ever engaged in risk planning, you would list the risks out, and then you'd start to rank them high, medium, low in terms of the likelihood that they're going to occur and the impact it would make and the importance. So very, very similar exercise if you've done this before. And the importance of rating the different drivers is that it makes you stop and think about what are the conditions under which these drivers are going to affect your business. So importance would mean that this is something that is critically important to your business. If you are not, government policy and mandates may still affect your operations if you're not a part of an advocacy organization, but it would affect it more if you were. For example, the impact it would make. So I think of impact in terms of urgency of addressing often, because if it's going to make a big impact, you're more urgent in terms of your planning around that to try to mitigate that, and then the level of uncertainty that you're feeling. It's impossible to be completely accurate with your ratings, but if you're doing this part of the exercise with your executive team, it does spark good conversation. It helps you really discuss, if you didn't share an understanding, again, of certain aspects of your business, you're going to be able to get to that understanding relatively quickly by going through the exercise. At the end of the day, what this does do, if we tally the score across the rows, one of the things we're going to be able to do then is say, this is where we need to most urgently put our attention, especially when we're planning or identifying scenarios even before we're planning. If you group these, then you could say, well, what's going to make a bigger impact on us really the spread of COVID-19 or the global recession? And let me illustrate that for a second. If you're a healthcare organization, and let's say that you represent pulmonologists, and pulmonologists or the respiratory technologists, for example, there's going to be all sorts of impact on those members related to the spread of COVID-19 and what they're experiencing on the job and how much attention they're going to be putting on the job and what's the available or the leftover attention for the association. If you're one of those associations, and let's say you have a pretty good investment fund and a diverse source of revenue, so you're not overly dependent, let's say, on an annual meeting, then the spread of COVID-19 is going to have more of an impact on your association. It also presents more opportunity for you to support your members than, let's say, the recession. But if you're an association that maybe is industry-based or commercial association, the global recession might impact your organization more than COVID-19. So or the virus, but I should say. So this gives you an opportunity then to kind of weigh and start. And what we're doing with the scenario planning is now we're starting to focus and say, where do we need to put our time and attention? So then we want to look at the potential short, mid, and long-term impacts. And so the slides you see on the screen is the result of a small group of association CEOs getting together yesterday. And we went through and defined what we thought for associations as a whole, not a specific association, but in general for associations as a whole, what we thought the impact of COVID-19, the recession, was going to be. And in a very short period of time, we were together for 2 hours, and then spent, I would say, probably 20 minutes of that or so just talking about the situation in general. So let's say an hour and a half. And in an hour and a half, we generated over 124 potential impacts of COVID-19 and the recession, and kind of group those into short, mid, and long term. So this is where Abe was saying we're starting to make predictions. We're doing forecasts. We know our forecasts are going to be wrong, but what it's doing is it's creating discipline us, right? It's helping us, again, to focus on what we think might be happening or what could happen, and how we want to get to the extent that we can, especially in the midterm, in front of it, as opposed to be solely reactive to it. So in the short term, there's not a whole lot to do but be reactive. And I define short term as 1 to 2 months and midterm to 3 to 8 months. I think that feels more and more like it's a little bit optimistic. Long term would be when we're starting to bounce back from the recession, when we feel like we maybe are on firmer ground and know what is exactly happening with the virus. So more and more, I think that our short term is fine, 1 to 3 months. Midterm may be more like 4 to 12 months, and then 12 months and beyond be long term. So this is something that is constantly adjusting as we get new information. But at this point in the process, what I would probably do is move this beyond the executive team and bring it into your divisions. So depending on how you wanted to look at your short, mid, and long term, you may want divisions to go through this exercise. You've set them up, you've talked about the drivers, you're educating them, so you may want those staff now to get involved and start brainstorming these potential impacts. There's a couple of benefits of doing this with a wider staff group, at least with directors and managers. And I'm going to go back and reference something that Abe talked about, but also preview something Kevin Martlage is going to talk about, and that's transparency. We're channeling Mr. Rogers a lot right now, so I'll channel Mr. Rogers too and say that, we want to be told. If something's going to hurt, we want to be told. By having the staff take a look at the potential impacts, they're starting to understand the situation. It also engages them more in being responsive to the situation and getting their head in the game, and starting to come up with ways that we can reduce the negative effects of what we're experiencing. So what are the actions that we can take to reduce that? But it also gives them a heads up that, look, this is a very difficult situation that we're going through. We're doing the best that we can. We're being proactive and trying to manage it. But there are some hard things that are probably going to come down the pike, and it starts to prepare them for that. And interestingly enough, in my experience going through this with Apex in 2008, I do think engaging in these exercises give staff also a sense of some control, some understanding that they may not have had. Imagine how difficult it is as a staff member to know that this kind of planning is happening in the background and you're not engaged in it. So this is the place where I would, again, engage staff. Just to reiterate, these are some of the key areas that we would expect to be impacted, or that I would expect to be impacted. Your categories may be different. You may divide this differently, but what's important here is, again, that you're looking at the short, the mid, and the long-term impact. Okay, after you've done that work and you've gotten all that data back, and it is data, right? It's perception, it's forecast, it's data. and probably coming back to you in an Excel spreadsheet, then you're going to have to decide what type of scenarios you're going to address. And I think here you have choices. Abe mentioned that at ASCM they're looking at 9 different scenarios, and I will say ASCM is a more sophisticated organization in this regard than most associations for a number of reasons. It's a larger association, there's more staff. It's a kind of been there, done that a little bit with the recession, so those planning mechanisms were already in place. So I think for most organizations that are maybe tackling scenario planning for the first time, if you can land on, 3 to 5 good scenarios to pursue and to plan against, that I believe is manageable. And remember, planning for scenario planning in what's a perceived crisis situation, I think that's what this is for sure. You want to be able to do this rapidly. This cannot take months. It really can't even take weeks. This is something that you have to set as a priority and get it done as quickly as you possibly can. And then after you get a baseline plan in place, you can of course continue to improve it. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but it needs to get in place fairly quickly because you're making decisions right now on a day in and day out basis. So one of the ways that you can look at this, and there's a lot of different ways that you can create your scenarios, but I tend to like a matrix. And so what I did is I created a matrix here where the axes were impact on revenue and impact on engagement. And the reason that I did that, again, in theoretical, is that we know the recession is going to impact revenue. And I really, truly believe that COVID-19, obviously, the virus itself is going to impact engagement. People are going to be sick and not engaging. People are going to be working and not able to engage. And so I can't imagine personally a scenario where engagement doesn't fall until we figure out ways to engage that start to bring it back up again in the midterm and the long term. So the ones that I picked out here, you can see the first one is that the condition is that we have a high loss of revenue and a high loss of engagement. And I call this scenario the swift significant decline. If we're losing revenue and our members aren't with us anymore, in essence, they're not engaging with us, then this is probably the most dangerous situation that we have. And so this would be a situation that would be faced, I would say, by an organization that doesn't have a diverse product portfolio and service portfolio. Maybe membership has been on decline, it's a struggle. Maybe it's an organization that is really dependent on an annual meeting, and those annual meetings aren't taking place. So that's a scenario, scenario number 1. Number 2 is high loss of revenue, but low loss of engagement. So that means that engagement, people are still with us. They're hanging in there. Maybe they're not able to take education. Maybe they're not able to certify, but they're still paying their dues. And hopefully we have their annual meeting that's in the spring next year and not in the fall or the spring this year. And I would call this a recoverable decline, that we're going to see a blip, but we're going to be able to come back from that. And this is the situation, this is the scenario that I think Abe is talking about with the 25%, which is significant. There's no question about it. So going from 40 million to 32 million that's a significant loss of revenue, but it's a recoverable decline for the reasons that Abe mentioned, that he has a diverse product portfolio that he's working with. He has a strong investment fund. He's got a rather large staff that he can work with. So, his likely scenario at high level scenario is going to be number 2. Number 3 is a low loss of revenue, but a high loss of engagement. So this one, I would worry about long-term decline. That would be the scenario that we're looking at. So maybe we'll make it through the short-term and the midterm consequences. But what we find out when we come out on the other side of the recession is that our members have lost interest in us. What type of association may struggle with this? I would worry about any associations where the members belong as an obligation. So if you have a rather traditional membership base where they belong because it's what you do, and we find this with MD organizations, for example, and I'm not portending this for MD organizations, but it would be something that I would worry about. And that they are still engaged with us and they're getting their CUs and they're doing the things that they normally would do, but they're just losing interest in the association. And so this is also a scenario I think that we could inadvertently work ourselves into if we're not able to hold on to the engagement of our members and our customers, no matter what industry they represent. So this would be a viable scenario for a number of different organizations as well. The last scenario here then, because I'm using a matrix, is low loss of engagement and low loss of revenue. The recession and COVID-19 have little impact overall on the association. So this is what we saw with a number of healthcare related organizations during the 2008 recession. While industry-based associations were really hurting, the healthcare associations were continuing, and in some cases they were thriving. So healthcare seemed at that point to be relatively immune to the economic conditions. I am not a healthcare expert, so it's hard for me to say how this recession is going to impact healthcare organizations. But what I will say is quite obvious to me anyway, is that we're going to see a loss of engagement as the healthcare professionals are just focusing on meeting the needs of our communities and the public health concerns related to COVID-19. So again, other ways to look at scenarios, you can just brainstorm potential scenarios, again, with your executive team that could come out of this based on the data you got from a broader staff input. But you go ahead and define your scenarios. And then you're going to take a look at the metrics that will help you understand when you're moving into those scenarios. So how will we know when one of these scenarios is coming into fruition? And you'll want to identify both external and internal metrics. So the external metrics, again, just off the top of my head, well, we could continue to watch the infection rate, because that's going to talk to us about how available, again, that translates over on the internal side, how available are members to engage, mortality rate, hospitalization rate, virus abatement date. So that's what we're looking for right now. We're trying to understand when is this going to be over, or when are we going to be on decline, and we simply don't have, we're not in a place, we're in the eye of the storm right now, so we're not going to know that. But at the point we know that, we'll be able to start modeling even association activity again. Related to the recession, we might look at the decline in global output, trade disruption, treasury yield, business sentiment, consumer sentiment, industry impact. There's a lot of reports already out about industry impact. We know that the hospitality impact has been pretty severe already. It's certainly hotels and restaurants and various public venues. So we can continue to kind of monitor that and see what's happening in those related industry. From an internal metric, these are some of the ones that Abe shared as well. Obviously, we're watching total revenue and its impact on net revenue. Why don't I put expense here? What is our expense management indicators here? Because expense is in your control. Total revenue is not completely in your control. You can try to market to build that revenue up, but as we talked about, somebody asked a question earlier about communications and members feeling that they're being bugged with all the communications that they're getting. You can do your best, but total revenue in this situation is not completely under your control. But expense management for the most part is. So it's not, that to me is not an indicator that we'd be looking at, but it's something that you're managing. The CEO wants to know about expense management, but it's not, it doesn't portend anything other than whether you're doing a good job as a manager. Your retention, your acquisition, your registration, product sales if you have them, lead time, lead flows if you, especially if you have a sales organization, and especially if that sales organization is working with corporate buyers, there's all sorts of sales metrics that you'll want to watch. But I would also say, from an engagement perspective, incoming calls and incoming emails. So what I would suspect would happen is that we're going to see, even if you're, let's say, outside sourcing your customer service, so there's a customer service bank that is working for you, or if it's staff, just generally knowing what is the call volume like, and is it really declining, is it slowing? And that's an indication often of our members' ability or our customers' ability to engage with us as well. All right, and so after we do this work, then it's really time to start looking at different strategies for addressing the scenarios. And so here I've put together just a simple table. with the three scenarios that I want to address. I only have three here from the matrix because the low impact on revenue and the low impact on engagement is business as usual. And I already know what my strategy is for addressing the status quo. So I'm not going to spend time and energy on that scenario. I pushed it away. And here I'm really only focusing on these three scenarios that would demand action from us that's different from what we would normally do. And so the first thing that I'm looking at here is a goal for each. And the goal is not our long-term goal necessarily, but it's the goal for managing through this scenario. So our most intense scenario was swift decline. That's the scenario, that's the case that it feels like, let's say we canceled our spring meeting, we were pretty dependent on our spring meeting, or let's say all of a sudden our members just simply cannot take time to renew their dues or engage in education or certification. We may, and we're very dependent, we may see a more swift decline in that. And so the goal simply is to slow that decline. Why do I say slow the decline? Because if we can slow the decline, we end up reserving more resource to move into that recoverable decline. Period. So the first thing you want to do, as Abe was talking about, in a turnaround situation, and that is swift decline is definitely a turnaround situation. What you want to do is stop the bleeding. So what is it going to take to stop the bleeding? And so what we would expect in this swift decline is our strategy would have an awful lot to do with reduction of costs. So when you look down the categories here, and this time I just did it with asterisks and saying how important is this strategy potentially to addressing the situation. You can see on a scale of 1 to 3 that reducing overhead costs and reducing direct costs becomes critically important. Partnering potentially, so what are my opportunities to maybe get some funding or be able to work temporarily or long-term with another related association so we can get through this period. Again, these are just potential strategies that we can engage, but in the swift decline, you can see why those are so important to that. The recoverable decline goal is what we really want to do is shorten that recovery time. So slowing the decline is one thing, because we then would go on, if we were able to move into the recoverable decline scenario, then we're going to shorten the recovery time. So we want to make this as painless as possible. And that's, again, I'm going to refer back to ASCM. ASCM goal is to keep that recovery time short. So they're in, I think, based on what Abe is saying, in that recoverable decline, they're going to want to bounce back as quickly as they possibly can. So all the strategies that they're going to implement to bounce back have that goal of saying, okay, we're going to eat this. So this is a difficult period of time. We know we're going to see this reduction, but how do we make decisions today so that once we get through this, let's say we're in I don't know, February of next year, March, and we're starting to see vaccine rollout, or we've built immunity as a population. I'm, out of my league here as I talk about the medical aspects of this. But at that point, how do we bounce back? How do we come back from the decline? And what are the decisions we're going to make today so that we can shorten that recovery period? And partnering probably isn't the best solution in this regard. We still are going to need to reduce overhead, because remember, if our resources, what will happen if we decline by 25%, but we don't reduce our spend accordingly? Well, we'll either go into our investments funds, and if we go into our investment fund too heavily, that's going to prolong our recovery time, because we're not going to make investment in product and service again that we need to, anything we put on hold. So there has to be a reduction of expense when you're looking at a decline, usually over a period of time. Now, I didn't include reducing direct costs in the recoverable decline part, just primarily because when I think about direct costs, I'm thinking about that related to revenue generating programs, and I want those revenue generating programs to be able to continue. So I might slow my spend on that, but I'm probably going to stay in the game on those. And as Abe talked about with the 2008 recession, which to APICS, what APICS was the organization at the time, was probably more severe than what ASDM is projecting right now. But at that point, we stayed the course. We kept the investment in updating the product, our cash cow product, and that helped us to bounce back more quickly. Long-term decline, what I'm saying in terms of reducing overhead and direct costs is probably going to happen over the long term. So it may not be an immediate response, but we might feel, and a lot of times organizations do, they feel like, wow, we weathered the storm, we got through the short-term impact and the midterm impact, we're still whole. And they get on the other side of that and they find they don't have a business. Maybe their members are not so engaged, maybe their products and services are not as relevant, maybe they went stale. So over a course of time now, they're going to continue to reduce overhead and direct costs because their revenue isn't bouncing back. Investing in marketing. So this one is an interesting one. Again, is in the short term, making a whole lot of investment in marketing intuitively to me does not make as much sense. Now, I wouldn't say that we're going to pull back in terms of our capacity to market, but we might put some things on hold right now because for a number of reasons, and primary reason is we just can't overcome through communication and marketing the barrier that keeps people from buying. So if we're in an industry where again, I'm going to go back to the frontline healthcare workers, where they're just simply too busy to pay attention, then using marketing for direct sales is probably not going to be a good use of our resources, and it's probably going to irritate our members, or they're just ignoring it. But we don't want to lose capacity to market. And so marketing then becomes increasingly important as we time out this crisis. And so we want to be able to continue to build our marketing capacity. And now I'm looking at, I probably would have put 2 asterisk under recoverable decline and maybe 3 under long term, because the marketing becomes critically important. Investment in product development, new product development, we're not going to do that in the short term. Especially when we think about short term as being 1 to 2 months, it doesn't make any sense, and you wouldn't even have any money if you were in the swift decline scenario. But as we start to recover, we can start putting more money into that. And then, addressing barriers to participation. I think that this is important the whole way through. So when we look at engagement, right now, it's not too early to start thinking about how do we make engagement more meaningful and more important for our members. So if you're not in healthcare and your members are more at home right now than they've been before, maybe feeling more isolated, what are the ways that the association can help them feel somewhat connected? And I think everybody's getting inundated with virtual meetings and those types of things. So I haven't spent tons of time thinking about it, but what I can perceive is that there is going to be a need for this connection. And so the opportunity, the long-term opportunity, is going to be finding ways to connect your members to each other so that they are able to provide support and feel like they're a part of a community again, and that they're just not isolated and on their own. I will say about scenario planning, let me go back for a second. Just like any type of a strategic plan, when we talk about partnering or reducing overhead or direct costs or whatever, you still have to put the plan part together, and I haven't done that as an example here, but you're still going to talk about what are my goals for partnering, and then what are the various strategies that I would look to under partnering, and the tactics and the timelines and things like that. You're going to go ahead and to build out, some planning underneath each of those, and not as heavy as a strategic plan. So if you had a one-page kind of description of the strategy and the goal that you're trying to accomplish, and what are the different tactics that you'll put into place if the scenario starts to come to fruition, I think that that's good enough right now. I think financial modeling to support your scenario analysis is hugely important, and that's something your finance staff have to do. But with each one of these scenarios, you would have a financial model that would help you understand with your indicators, obviously, what situation you would be in and what you're going to have, what kind of resources you're going to have, and what resources you may not have anymore. So those things are also really important. In the end, I think that this is really all about leadership. And it feels like when I'm talking about scenario planning, even to my ears, that that's a lot of detail. And what's the CEO play in this? Well, if you're a CEO, I think the play is simply that you are initiating scenario planning. So you're getting your people working on it quickly so that you get a lay of the land, because your job in essence is to be able to communicate, for you to be to talking to your members, to talking to your leaders and talking to your staff and keeping them with you and everybody pulling in the same direction. You need to say, as a CEO, this is where we are, this is how we got here, and this is where we're going to go. And that's, I think, what people are looking for from leadership today. And that, again, if you're in that leadership role, if you're a CEO, that's essentially what your main responsibility is in a situation like this. And scenario planning gives you the answers you need to be able to address those 3 points. So I do think that scenario planning is critically important for the organization across the board, but the results of it are especially important to our CEOs. So I think I'm going to remember, yep, that's the last slide.
So
Sherry, you're muted. Oh, there you are.
Can you hear me? All right. Well, appreciate that. That's great information, Sharon. We had a question from after Abe's presentation, but I think you may be able to address this. How do you respond to your board if they take a hunker down for 8 weeks, this will pass attitude in responding to this health crisis?
I think I would go back to my first slide and say, you know, hope for the best and plan for the worst. When I was making personal decisions and people were challenging my personal decisions a couple of weeks ago and trying, you know, running my own scenario plans in my mind, because I have an 87-year-old mother, I have a 97-year-old mother-in-law, and, you know, my priority is protecting them. What I would say when people thought I was being too cautious is simply, okay, I will never regret having a plan. I will be grateful if I don't have to implement my plan, but I will never regret having it. And this is something that a friend of mine taught me who lives in the Caribbean, and she says, you know, come hurricane season, we all have plans. And we're all glad if we don't have to implement them, but we're especially happy we have them if we need them. And so if the board is resisting and saying, you know, let's not do anything differently, if I were a CEO, I would say, well, this is why I am going to be proactive. This is what you're paying me for. And so I am going to use this time to create the plans and to watch it. And you will be happy that I've done this if in fact we need to implement them. And I think obviously there's no way we're not going to be implementing these at this point.
Yeah, good point. So another question, what tools would you recommend we use to support scenario planning?
So I think that a lot of the things that we're doing with scenario planning are facilitated conversations. And so this is something that we do. We'll come in and we'll facilitate. And if we're doing that, we would use a variety of tools. I think Excel, certainly to collect information, is great. But if you're having a facilitated conversation, even interactive tools like Poll Anywhere, even if you're just working with staff, one of the things I love about a tool like Poll Anywhere in PowerPoint is that you can let all the staff go ahead if we're brainstorming and just use their fingers and think quickly, let's say about potential impacts as we talked about it, and then the system is collecting that, and you can go back through then and evaluate all those and transfer it over into Excel. But I don't know that it takes a whole lot more than your Microsoft Office suite, and because it's really just collecting and then presenting information.
So you know, Sharon, you talked about facilitating meetings, and now obviously we're facilitating meetings remotely, and Abe and talked about that. I just wanted to mention to the folks on the phone, you can see that there's a little bit of a delay with Sharon's video. So what we did today, we're actually using our phone for voice and then have the video on the computer, because we were concerned about the amount of load on Wi-Fi as we're kind of working. So that's just an added sidebar tip if you have to facilitate a discussion with board members or anything like that, and you don't want to see the delays on the computer that we're seeing because of the bandwidth on the infrastructure as everybody in the world is now on working from home. So one more question, Sharon. Who do you recommend that we involve in scenario planning? Leaders, staff? You talked about getting, other management staff involved. But can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that this is a top-down exercise, and let's talk about it first from a staffing perspective. I think the CEO obviously initiates scenario planning, and if your CEO isn't, if you're not a CEO and your CEO is not initiating, then I think that's a conversation that you should be having. So the CEO says, hey, it's time that we do this. This is why we're doing it. I would have the executive team, a leadership team of organizations that have these on the staff side. If you're a smaller organization, you might go directly to your full staff right off the bat. But I think executive team really looking at the driving forces that we talked about, those factors, and what's happening, externally and internally, and how that impacts the internally. And then at the point that you're looking at short, medium, and long-term impact, that's where I would broaden out and involve more staff. So my background is with a larger association as a staff member or as an executive vice president with Apex during the recession. We let the leaders know what was happening, but my recollection was we did not engage committees in the scenario planning process. And I know that other associations, and a lot of times, especially MD-based organizations, have a very strong and large committee structure. So there may be opportunity then to engage those as well, especially when we talk about COVID-19. Where would I engage them? Probably only on the factor side. I don't think I would, once we get into the short, mid, and long-term impact, that gets really operational. So if I did feel like I needed to involve the committee in scenario planning, I probably do it in looking at the factors and making sure we're really well aware of those. Of course, then the board needs to be aware of the scenarios that you're planning for and how you're going to operate under these conditions. So the CEO would take that back to the board.
All right, terrific. Well, thank you so much, Sharon. I think now we will turn it over to Kevin Martlage, who is going to talk about leaning on your business culture in difficult times. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Sharon. And just wanted to say thanks to everybody for attending today. And I'm looking forward to talking through this with you. And we'll definitely have some time at the end for questions and so forth. So it's interesting as I kind of put this PowerPoint together and kind of getting prepared today about all the different ways that you can actually lean on culture in the difficult times, especially as, for instance, like the times we're going through right now. And so just to kind of give you a little context in terms of where I'm speaking from and kind of my background and culture, I want to go very quickly and show you, if I can get my computer to work here. There we go. I've spent the last 24 years kind of trying to understand the importance of a business culture, all the way from, back in '96 when I kind of entered the workforce and so forth. And obviously, I didn't realize at that point in time how important culture was, and certainly didn't understand how important culture was when you're going through adverse situations or difficult times within your organization or even within your team. And the reason I want to kind of talk about this is because, throughout all of these things in my career, and I was going back and looking, there's been all kinds of kind of adverse situations that I've been faced with either as a leader or as a member of a team that I think is important. And there's some themes that have kind of go through all of those different areas. And, everything, and as I go through these, none of these are more important than the other, and some are actually very tragic as we'll go through here. But, all the way back my first job, we had a tornado come through and wipe out, one of our buildings that we worked in a retail store. And when I was in Indianapolis working, we had a crane from a next door, construction site actually fall and damage the loading dock next to our printing facility. So we couldn't do shipments for a few days. And so, again, something that, we were not expecting, but certainly, helped us understand how culture can help us get over that, which we'll get into in just a second. And certainly as I went through my time out in New York City, helping my team and manage through the tragedy, which was September 11th, working in Manhattan, having a team of individuals that, we had to help kind of lead through that.
whole situation it was very telling and really taxed our culture quite a bit, as well as the Northeast blackout of 2003, for those of you that remember that, where the whole Eastern Seaboard was out of power, and we had to still figure out how to manage operations and so forth. Both of those really had an impact as to how our culture helped us bridge that gap between the normal and where we were going. And even as I continued on, throughout my career, we had a corporate transition when I joined FedEx office from the Kinko's to the current day FedEx office, as those of you know, and what all that took, going from a culture of really, individuality and kind of mom and pop mentality to transition to the corporate mentality and all the processes and procedures that FedEx office brought to the table and FedEx brought to the table was a huge transition, and having to manage that and really leveraging on your leadership skills as, being able to focus on, what's the culture and how can we help get over those kind of humps and all be moving in the same direction. And even with my last job, we had a big headquarter move from Champaign, Illinois to Atlanta, Georgia, and all the things that come into moving a headquarters and, how that can impact both positively and negatively your culture are all things that, me personally, I've been able to lead through. Obviously some are more tragic than others, and, each one is different in its own way. But one thing that was common through all of those, as I kind of look back through there was always a transparent, intentional, and trusting business culture. And those were the three key things that, whether I knew it or not, or my team knew it or not, I look back and those were things that really helped us bridge that gap, and from current day operations to whatever that, post-event transformation looked like with my team and with our organization. And so those are some of the things I want to kind of talk to you guys about today, about how you can lean on your business culture in those difficult times, and specifically focusing on those three things, as well as trust. And so if you look at kind of your current state and where we are, currently, I'm sure everybody on this call has an organization they work for. Obviously, you're probably strategically aligned in terms of your operations. You may have some minor issues that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, or things that you're working through as an organization or a team. But for the most part, I'm going to assume you have a functional team and a functional organization, and that you're going through, what typically everybody is going through as an organization, and some of the things that you're working through prior to, the COVID-19 coming around. So when things come up, such as 9/11, the recession we talked about, COVID-19, any other issues, that obviously puts a big damper, and it's something that you have to address, and it's going to affect that current state. And so what we like to try to think of is, how does your business culture, what can you lean on, regardless of the state it may or may not be in at this current time and in the current state? What can you do to help you bridge that gap to get to that post-event? And once you get to that post-event, it's really interesting to sit back and look and say, what did we learn from all of this? Right now, it's tough to see that because we're knee-deep in the middle of this COVID-19 thing. We're dysfunctional in terms of we're all working remote, we're all working from home, whatever that may be. But what did we really learn from that? And what can we be intentional about now that will help our team grow at the end? How did it affect our culture? So regardless of where we are in the current state, how did it affect our culture and where we are now post-event, whenever that may be? Did it help us get better in certain areas? Did it help us, did we take a step back in other areas? What are some things we need to plan for the next time? And then most importantly, how do we grow as a team? I can look back through all of those situations that I kind of mentioned briefly on my first slide, and I can give you numerous examples of how the team grew because we were faced with that adversity. Whether we had a good culture or not, and I can guarantee in some situations we had zero culture, we always stepped back at the end and said, look where we came from, look what we achieved, and how do we grow as a team? And I think those are all certainly, important things that we're going to talk about here towards the end. that are important to kind of remember as we're going through the situations we're currently going through. So regardless of your current state of your business culture, there are some key areas I think everybody can lean on. And when I say regardless of your current state, I know some of the organizations on the call probably have, a specific culture document that they've put together. I know with OrgSource, we've, worked with other, organizations on developing those culture documents. But whether you have that or not, there's some things that you can certainly begin doing today and can certainly keep in the forefront as you're moving through, the situation that we're going through right now. And those fall into communication, intentionality, transparency, and certainly trust. And we're going to talk about all four of these as we go through the presentation and kind of talk about not only some examples of what this may look like, but also why is this important and some ideas that you can do regardless of how your current culture is, in your organization today. So if we look at communication, how can we lean on communication in times like this? And I think the first and foremost thing, as I learned throughout my career, is you got to pull your leadership team together and identify roles and responsibilities. Regardless, I remember when we were going through 9/11 and we walked onto Times Square after evacuating our building, that was the first thing we did. Whether we meant to or not, we're very intentional about it. We got that leadership team together and kind of assessed the situation and kind of talked about, okay, what's next? What are we going to do? We didn't have all the answers, but at least we got those people together and we talked about and communicated with each other about, what we're doing. The second thing is we need to communicate the current state and any next steps as soon as possible. So in some of this stuff, we've touched on a little bit in both, Sharon and Abe's, presentations as well. But even if you don't have those answers, even if you're not ready to say, hey, this is what we're going to be doing, it's important to get in front of your team as soon as you possibly can and at least let them know, hey, we're on top of it. We don't have the answers, but this is where we currently are, and this is what we're going to be doing to kind of work through these things. Whether it's using, scenario planning like Sharon said, or any other tool that you may have, but it's important to let your team know kind of where you are currently and where you're moving forward from. As a leader, I always caught myself looking back when I had a time to kind of catch my breath in all these situations and say, what is it that I want to know in this situation? Because I guarantee if it's something that you want to know, there's a really good chance that your team would want to know that very same thing. And so I think it's very important to kind of take that step back if you can and say, okay, what do I want to know in this situation? What is it that I need to tell my team? And how can I relay that to my team? Another best practice that we used in numerous situations was, I know everybody kind of laughs about FAQs, but I think in an uncertain time such as these, it's important to kind of develop and maintain somehow an FAQ document that's accessible and updated. And, that would be something as you get your leadership team together to talk about roles and responsibilities, somebody that can kind of maintain that. Because it's really important. There may not be opportunity for you to go out and specifically talk with all of your team during a situation, or it may not be as easy as it was maybe in the current state. And so if you can kind of maintain that document somewhere that definitely your team can access, and depending on your organization, perhaps it's something that your members could access as well, just to kind of allow them, if they have a question, they can go and maybe touch base on that first to see if that can answer it. And certainly including on that who to contact in certain situations is important. And then the last thing with communication that is absolutely important is you have to develop your communication plan and you must stick to it. I can't tell you how many times that, we probably all have these stories, but in my past where we had a great communication plan to help us get through this, adverse situation or this uncertain time, and it was all great, but, we didn't stick to it. And then, as we're going to get into some of these other concepts here in just a second, if you're not sticking to it, then what's your team doing? How do they know what's going on? How do your members know what's going on? So it's very important to develop that plan up front and to make sure that, you know, you assign somebody and you're making sure you stick to that. And so those are some things that, in terms of communication. We'll kind of talk about how we string all this together here in a second. But, you know, communication is absolutely key as we're going through, you know, this uncertain situation. So intentionality is another one that it took me a long time in my career to really understand how important intentionality is when leading your team through an uncertain time. And, you know, the best way to say it is, if you do not provide context to your decision, to the situation, to whatever it is that you may be working through, you're allowing your team to make up their own story. And that's a concept that's kind of hard to understand at times. But really trying to think about, okay, we have this great communication plan. What do we need to do in terms of being intentional with our team so they have all the information they may need? And even how can we think about things they may know they don't need yet, but we're going to provide them for? Because the more your team in an uncertain time like this, the more time they're spending trying to figure out the story, trying to understand what's going on, that's a loss of productivity, and it just increases confusion. And it's going to have just such a negative impact on your culture. I could probably sit here and talk for another hour about, you know, situations I've been involved with where we weren't intentional as we should be, and how much productivity was impacted amongst the team just by spending time talking with each other, or sending emails, or being concerned about what's going on, whatever it may be. And especially if you have an organization where maybe your culture isn't maybe as high performing as it possibly could be, you know, this lack of intentionality is going to basically cripple what you've been working on if you're not intentional with that team, just because they're going to be spending all their time trying to figure things out instead of helping to move the organization forward. You know, another way to be intentional, regardless of what you have set up now, is try to provide specifics and available information when communicating decisions. So I can't tell you how important it was specifically with some of the transition things that we did in uncertain times with not only FedEx, but with my last organization about, you know, when a decision would come through, you can't always have everybody involved with every decision, obviously. There may be a lot of times where just the leadership team is having those conversations and making important decisions, of course. But whatever you can do to include statistics, include facts, include, you know, actual real context and reasoning behind why you made those decisions is going to help provide that context we talked about at the top. It's going to help minimize your team from making up that story and then affecting productivity. So this isn't always feasible in all situations, but regardless of your current culture and regardless of your current communication, especially in uncertain times, the more context and specifics you can provide around why you're making certain decisions, or why we have to move in this direction, or why we didn't understand this and now we do and here's the reason, it's only going to help continue to build that culture. And that's a very, I don't want to say easy thing, but something you can lean on very easily to help to continue to build that trust, which we're going to talk about here in just a few minutes. Another thing when you think about intentionality is, how can you eliminate emotion? How can you eliminate suboptimal behavior, I call it, and any ambiguity from the equation? And, you know, during uncertain times, we definitely have to make sure that we're running things as a business, but we also have to make sure that we have the thought and care and well-being of our employees in mind at all times. But there could be some opportunity where you may have to have a tough conversation with somebody regarding, you know, maybe their behavior, or, you know, maybe they're not performing like they should. And so being intentional with them about, hey, I feel for you. I understand where we may be. Tell me what I can do to help you, because we have to address this behavior, or we're not going to get to, you know, past all this. And so being able to really be intentional as to why you're doing that, and really having that kind of keen eye on not only performance, but how can I eliminate this emotion? If I see my team really struggling with something, let's go talk to them about it. Let's see what's causing some of those issues, and let's address it. You know, we're going to talk here in just a little bit about vulnerability, and I think that's key when it comes to intentionality. You have to be vulnerable with your team, and you have to let them know that you don't have all the answers, but I'm here to help, and we still have to move the organization forward as we get through this. As you jump into transparency and talk about that, I know, Abe talked a lot about transparency in his presentation. I really am a strong believer of transparency is key. It kind of goes back to the intentionality, and these two are very similar in each other in that, you need to be as transparent as you possibly can with your team, and you need to be able to listen to them and provide answers. And so even if that is, hey, I don't know the answer, but I'm going to get back to them, making sure that they do that. And this is an area that whether you have a very strong culture internally within your organization or not, starting to be transparent, especially in an uncertain time like this, can have huge dividends as you move through the uncertain time and get to that post-event kind of transformation that we mentioned earlier. So if you haven't been transparent, if you haven't been intentional, if you haven't been a good communicator or have good communication plans in place, these are all things that are very important. If you start now, it's going to have, a huge impact on your team down the road as you get through things. I think it's also important in terms of transparency that you identify as a leadership team what you should and should not say, including the reasons why. And this is very difficult to kind of understand or grasp in some areas, especially at the team member level and some of the teams that I've led. But there was certainly things as we were going through, 9/11 or the blackout, or definitely the transition to a new office in Atlanta, where there was maybe things, whether it be HR related or, bigger picture kind of things that weren't fully, developed out yet, where we had to hold back in telling the team certain information. It wasn't anything mischievous. It wasn't anything more than, we wanted to make sure we had a good rollout plan for that certain thing. But one thing is that you want to be transparent in that once those things are rolled out, or you hear people are asking questions about these things, you need to address them right away. And so that's why it's important that if you make that decision where there's certain things you're not going to be telling your team for whatever reason, you have that reason why, because once you roll that out, or once you start to talk about those things, it's important to go ahead and have those reasons why you held off on those things at the beginning. Especially as we're going through something like COVID-19, certainly with all the HIPAA rules and all those things we have to follow, it's very difficult, and there may be times where you're not going to be able to tell people why somebody's not working. There's a chance people will probably figure it out, but you're not going to be, communicating those things to your team, and so it's important that you're including, some of those reasons why, and you're very transparent about those things up front. I think it's also important to make sure that you provide any new information as soon as possible. Now, you have to be careful. You don't want to be sending out, 100 emails a day, or you don't want to be, making, if you're texting your team, doing that 100 times a day. But hopefully, as you've developed your communication plan to help you get through this uncertain time, you've worked in there maybe, hey, every day at 4 o'clock, we're sending an email out with an update on things, or once a week we're meeting. Or I know there's an organization, a friend of mine works at, that they have a meeting in the morning and the meeting in the afternoon, where they have to, touch base, and they kind of talk about what's going on because everybody's remote. So being very cautious as to getting that new information out as soon as possible is important. So your team is aware, and so it helps to build that context, and it helps to alleviate some of those opportunities they have in terms of, making up their own story and affecting productivity. So having a mechanism in place that you can do that is very important. I think the other thing with transparency, again, kind of goes along with the FAQ, thing on the previous slide, was create an open forum or collaboration mechanism to allow employees access and comment. I think as we all know, as we go through these uncertain times, maybe it hasn't hit every organization yet, but I'm sure it will. I know it has in other situations that I've helped lead a team through, is that employees have a ton of questions, but we all get busy. We're all focused on the day-to-day. we're all like, you know, focused on getting from point A to point B and all the things in between. And we don't always have a time to, you know, collaborate and get that temperature check and check in with our team. So having some kind of open forum that you can do that. You know, some things that I know in my past job we used when it was around. We couldn't use this way back because it hasn't been around that long, but, you know, even creating, if you don't have internal, you know, chatting features within your organization, creating like private Facebook pages or Twitter pages or Messenger or whatever it may be, where just your team can be there. So there's some ways that they can, you know, be talking or submitting questions or whatever it may be, even through email. Having that outlet for your team to be able to do that, and then making sure that there's answers with that is very important in my opinion, because all of our team, as we're going through this, they need that outlet in ways that they can help, you know, still feel like they're collaborating, even though we're in a remote workforce maybe environment. So the last thing I want to kind of touch on in terms of ways you can lean on your culture is trust. And I'm a true believer of trust is the lifeline of an effective business culture. Without trust, everything else is pretty difficult, in my opinion. And this has taken me a long time to try to, you know, figure this out, and I'm still figuring it out. But I could sit and talk about stories where trust, as soon as it was broken, everything just went downhill, and it required us so much effort and energy to kind of get back even partially to the level of trust maybe we had at the beginning. So thinking of trust as the lifeline of that effective business culture, you know, communication, intentionality, and transparency will all build that trust regardless of your current business culture. I can almost guarantee if you even take one or two of the points we've talked about today and begin to start to implement some of those things and begin to start to think in those terms as you move through, you know, the next, you know, however many weeks or months we're going to be going through this, you will start to build that trust within your team. And you will start to build, excuse me, that baseline that everything else can be built upon as you move forward. I think also, you know, vulnerability as a leader is necessary, but sometimes difficult in adverse situations. As you get to certain things, you know, like we're going through now, where it seems like the world's changing on a, you know, an hourly basis, if not every minute. You have to make quick decisions sometimes. And I think that you may not always make those right decisions, or there may be mistakes or whatever. But you have to be very vulnerable as a leader and be able to, you know, admit to your team, hey, I made a mistake. Or, you know what, hey, I don't have the answers, but let's work on this together. Or, you know what, I feel for you. I'm going through the exact same thing that you are in terms of, you know, I'm uncertain about what tomorrow may bring. And so let's work on that. What can I do to help support that? And let's work together on this understanding. So anything you can do to kind of show that vulnerability in a sincere way, I think goes a long way to help, you know, build trust within your team. And again, this is an area that as you move past this adverse situation or uncertain time is going to pay huge dividends in the growth of that team and the trust down the road. And, you know, the last point about trust is, you know, trust is developed over time and requires a great deal of patience, but could be impacted immediately. And so as you're building up trust over time, and things like this may come up, or there may be an adverse situation where that trust is broken, the more you've done to build that trust up, the less impact it's going to have on that trust. And you're going to be able to get back to, you know, the current level, and even past that current level. The more intentional you are, the more transparent you are, and the more communication you provide your team. So trust is a very difficult thing to develop. It does take patience, but, you know, doing the little things along the way and even making some impacts in the areas that we just talked about are going to have huge dividends down the road as you continue to build that trust, especially if you're in a situation where maybe, you know, trust is not at the level you would like it to be, or you're working very hard as an organization to build that trust. You know, implementing some of these things will only help to continue to build that over time. So what's this all mean? Let's kind of put this all together as we're kind of wrapping up before we get into like the Q&A section. You know, just to kind of recap, communication. If you remember only a couple things from what I'm saying from each point, here they are. Develop a communication plan and stick to it. Communicate often and in a timely manner. I think those are all very basic things around communication that, you know, regardless of your current situation or culture, can be implemented very quickly. Intentionality, always provide context around your decisions and try to eliminate emotions, suboptimal behavior, and ambiguity from the equation. Being able to be intentional is sometimes an art, but if you kind of put yourself in the shoes of your employees or the shoes of your member or the shoes of whoever you may be speaking with and try to be very intentional about how you're communicating and how you're making decisions and so forth, it's only going to help you know, continue to build that culture. Transparency, as we talked about, and Abe talked about, Sharon talked about, provide new information as soon as possible, listen to your team and provide them answers. You know, again, we talked about how important it is if you don't have the answer, just say that. I don't have the answer, but I'm going to figure that out and then get back with them. Pretty basic stuff in terms of, you know, leadership, but it's extremely important as you're moving through an uncertain time like we are now. And then trust, it being the lifeline of effective business culture. And again, it's developed over time, requires a great deal of patience, but can be impacted immediately. So really, you know, take a look at if we're hitting on all these other cylinders, how is that impacting my trust? And I guarantee even if you do one or two things in each of these areas, as we get past the current situation and into that post-event kind of transformation of our team, you're going to look back and say, you know, wow, we've really built a lot of trust. We've really done a really good job. Our team is now more intentional. And those are the opportunities where you can really figure out what you're leaving on the table, and you can kind of start to capitalize those after you get through this uncertain time and say, look, you know, we really grew as a team. Let's do something. Let's keep this going. Let's keep the road going, and you know, trying to continue to enhance them in those areas. So if you go back to our current thing, you know, kind of what is next for your team and organization, you know, your business culture is so very important, regardless of the situation you may be in now or what level your business culture is at, whether you think it's good or bad or whatever. Using communication, intentionality, transparency, and trust can help build the guardrail, so to speak, of that bridge from your current situation to the post-event transformation with your team. And as you start to get to the edge of that bridge, as you're going over, your culture is starting to be, you know, tested. You know, look at these 4 areas and which areas you can, you know, look at and say, okay, we're starting to be tested here. Is my communication where it needs to be? Is my intentionality where it needs to be? Is my transparency where it needs to be? Have we affected trust, and how do we get back to the level we need to be? Kind of go through that mental checklist of those 4 things, and then ask yourself, what can I do to impact those to get us back in the middle of the bridge and move forward? So some questions as we go into the Q&A, I'd like to kind of, you know, throw out there, and then we can open it up, is what is already included in your current culture that we've talked about? You know, I'm sure we all feel like we communicate. Some of us feel like we may be very intentional when we lead. Some people may feel like we're transparent. Everybody has different levels of trust within their team, but what are some things now that you already have in place that you can capitalize on with some of these things in mind as we move forward? And what can you enhance today to minimize the impact that COVID-19 is having on everybody? What can you enhance today to help bridge that gap of the learning curve that's involved with everybody going to a remote workforce basically overnight? What are some things you can enhance to continue to make sure that your team is growing and you're leading them properly and helping them to get, you know, past everything? A couple more things is what's necessary to build your bridge. So kind of, you know, after you've assessed kind of these are the things we have, these are some things we can start doing today, these are some things we can enhance, you know, what else is necessary based on your organization and your team? Is there outside support I need to bring in to help with some of this? Is there just, we need to have, you know, spend an hour a week or an hour a day or whatever touching base with the team? And is there somebody that can be kind of the, the director of culture, so to speak, in our organization that can make sure that they're touching base with the team as we're going through these things. What are some things that you as an organization may need to look at to help build this bridge completely? Because you may be good at one or two of the things, but maybe the other two you have some opportunity to do. So as you're doing your strategic planning and you're doing your scenario planning, I encourage you to really look at your culture and some of these things we're talking about at a very high level, and what else is necessary and what could you, implement. And then the last part, which is always good, is you get through an uncertain situation and you're kind of at the other side and everybody's happy that we did there. We're celebrating that we've made it through this and we're making our rebound. Is how will these difficult times transform your team? What is it that you, between now and whenever this may be over, do you want to be able to celebrate with your team in terms of your culture? Do you want to be able to, at the end, during your post-event transformation, when you're looking back, say, wow, I just nailed communication out of the park. That was what really got us through this whole situation, and we need to make sure that we keep doing that. Or are you going to sit there and say, hey, I could have been a little bit more transparent in some of these situations, and, I'm going to learn from that, and here's some things I'm going to do to keep that going, to keep that momentum going. Because even though I wasn't great at it, we still made an impact in terms of providing transparency to our team, and that's what really helped us get through this. So being able to have some of those kind of conversations with you and your team at the end of this, and be thinking of that stuff right now as a leader as to, how is this going to impact us down the road? Because also during adverse times, that's going to help you kind of, keep going. That was always the motivation with me of saying, being very intentional about the situation that was provided to me and say, this really stinks that we're going through this, but what can I do as a positive out of this? What can I do to help my team kind of get through this and transform at the end? So those are some 4 questions. I'll kind of just open it up now, and we can kind of talk about, any questions that anybody may have. I'll be happy to answer them at this point in time. So.
Thanks, Kevin. Great.
Thank you.
So we did have a question. Someone asked, leaders are able to maintain optimism in the worst of times, but over-optimism portrays being in denial or loony. So how does balance optimism with reality and not being quote-unquote real?
Sure. Well, I think that, you can kind of look back at that intentionality and transparency and really, you want to be optimistic by all means, but you want to be very sincere about it as well. And so I think that's where I talk about, taking some of that emotion out of it. Let's get to the basics. Let's really start talking about the specifics with our team, because the more facts you can provide, the more data you can provide, the more things you can provide to support that optimism, the more sincere it's going to be and the more real it's going to be for your team. And so, obviously, I know there's all kinds of teams that I've managed in the past where they're just like, oh, you're being too optimistic about things. But at the same time, if you can deliver on some of those things and support that with some, specifics, they may start to come along a little bit, and there could be some vulnerability there that I know times where I've had to say, you know what, I am a little bit overzealous in this situation. I'm going to tone it back down a little bit. Thank you for keeping me in check. So I think it's a fine line you run, but if you're being intentional and transparent about things, I think you'll find out that optimism can be very sincere with your team.
Great. So I have another question. My CEO is scattered in this crisis and causing stress to team members. How can I manage up and facilitate a strong culture for others right now without stepping on toes, of course?
Sure. That's a tough one. But the only advice I can give is, lead by example. Start making sure that your communication, whether it be upward, downward, outward, whatever, is very intentional. It's very transparent. Is very to the point. Is driven by trust. All those kind of things. And if you're starting to do that, there's 2 things that could happen. One, the team could start to say, "Hey, what's going on?" Or your executive director could say, what is going on? And at that point in time, you have that perfect opportunity to tell them, say, look, this is a tough time we're going through right now. I'm just trying to do all I can to be transparent and intentional with my team and to kind of keep us all on the same page. And then you can have that conversation. Or the other thing could be is, maybe your executive director wouldn't even notice you're doing anything different. And in that case, maybe it's those conversations with your team. I think, adding that context up front that says, look, we're going through, I talked about getting your team together. And so that could be either as a leadership team or your team that you manage individually is sitting down and saying, look, I think we need to be very intentional and transparent during the next, few months, because if not, we're just going to be all over the place. And even if you have that conversation with your executive director, you feel like you have that ability or you're comfortable with having that conversation with your executive director, is just being very upfront with them. Say, look, this is uncertain times. I just want to do everything I can to help support you, executive director, in helping us get through this. And here's some ideas maybe I had, and maybe having that conversation. But I think leading by example is by far the most effective way, and it'll give you those opportunities to have those other conversations. So. That's a tough one, though. I agree. Any other questions or?
This is Kevin Ordonez.
Are you there? Okay. Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Mm-hmm.
So when someone loses trust, are there strategies to win that back?
It really depends on, I guess, what the situation was that caused you to lose that trust, and kind of how much trust you built up with that person or that team, to that point in time. But I'm a true believer if you go back to the basics of communication. If you feel like that trust has been impacted, I think you have to show that vulnerability as a leader or that vulnerability as a team member or a coworker that says, look, I feel like, something's changed. I feel like, maybe my decision I made has impacted the way we work together. I feel like maybe the way you're doing what you're doing is impacting our trust. I think being very intentional with those things and having those conversations is the best way to kind of start to rebuild that. Obviously, if you're in a situation in your culture where trust is non-existent or trust is an issue, that's going to be a lot more difficult to start those conversations. But I think I'm a true believer of you got to talk about it, and you got to be able to, be professional about it in a way that says, look, here's what happened. I'm not sure, maybe you didn't understand me, or maybe we just weren't on the same page, but let's work this out. Because at the end of the day, you have to really identify that relationship with that person is either important or it's not important, which chances are it's going to be very important. So you're going to want to work through it. And I think the best way to do that is to, start by talking about it and then kind of going from there.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
We did get another question coming in. So shedding is likely one of the response many associations will employ in response to this crisis. What are 2 or 3 things you think most associations will consider shedding? And I'm pretty sure that's in addition to in-person meetings over the next 8 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Obviously I'm sorry, go ahead.
Hey, Kevin, I could jump in on that one. This is Abe.
All right, Abe, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Abe.
Yeah, never fail to take advantage of an opportunity here. You have a lot of latitude about some of the changes that you can make as an organization. So if there were specific things that you wanted to have done, this is a good opportunity for you to use the current situation as an impetus to get some significant changes done in the organization. So lest you sit back and say, we can't do anything right now, this may be a more opportune time for you to make some strategic changes to your organization, following on what Kevin was saying, to develop trust, to develop that, sort of that esprit de corps within the organization, that you are, focused on the right things for the organization and you're making long-term, sustainable, responsible decisions. And so use this opportunity to take advantage of the circumstance. This is not all woe is me. there are significant opportunities that you can take as leaders right now to demonstrate that you are concerned and are willing to make the necessary changes in the organization. But to Kevin's point before, you have to have developed that trust before that you're making the decisions in the best interest of the organization as opposed to a knee-jerk response. So your communication strategy has to be comprehensive about why you're making the decision, the impact of that decision, and how the organization is better for it. So don't just sit back and say, we can't do anything right now because the recession hit or because we're dealing with this. This is an opportunity to make some significant changes if you, and again, consistent with the strategy of the organization. I'm not saying, we ought to lop off a particular program just because I don't like it right now. That's not a strategic decision. And so be very mindful about the opportunity that you have, but don't shy away from some of the hard choices or hard decisions that you had to make.
Great, thanks, Abe.
Not agree more.
Great. So thanks, everybody. We actually were going to open it up now for just questions to any of our presenters or questions that you guys are having in general that you are struggling with. Anything in terms of content that you hope that we can provide in the next week. Last week we did a webinar on crisis communications. Yesterday we spun up a webinar on how to work remotely. Just because we started hearing some people panicked about how to convert their offices quickly. So we do have that webinar recorded. If anybody's interested, you can reach out to us to get those two recordings. And then we do plan on doing a couple webinars again next week. So we'll open it up to you for questions or for comments in terms of what you're looking for that would help you guys move forward. As Emily said, if there's specific questions about your situation, if you want to post those in the Q&A.
Right. Well, this is Kevin Ordonez. Maybe I'll say a couple things as you guys are thinking. So other topics we thought about was, crisis strategy, and also adding on to the work from home tips and assessment. How does security play into that, especially if some of your employees are using their own machines? For example, do you have a bring your own device policy, and is that updated? But security is probably going to be on top of mind. It's probably come next week after we've all had a good week under our belts about this. So those are just some sample topics that we're looking at. And also from the work from home, how does that really, what are the different HR procedures or policies around that as well? Are you doing synchronous hours or asynchronous hours? Is there overtime? All those different things. So just a sampling of other topics of how, we can position you guys for success.
So one of the questions was, I had to cancel an in-person meeting and we are considering going virtual. What should we consider and when should we consider doing it? So yes, we've gotten a lot of questions regarding virtual meetings. We actually put together a spreadsheet of vendors. I think one of the things that we're talking to people about is really thinking through what content can be virtual, and then how you produce it. A lot of the folks were trying to convert their annual meetings into virtual meetings pretty rapidly, and we saw that could create some risks and some customer service issues. Typically, it takes a couple to 3 months to kind of put those programs together. So in terms of when to do that, make sure that you're taking time and planning is a consideration. Couple other tips, anything, Kevin, regarding virtual meetings? And Jane just added a link. We do have information about setting up virtual meetings at orgsource.com/COVID-19.
Great. I think the when is as soon as possible. You need as much runway as possible, especially if you want to record your speakers and make that as interactive as possible. So the sooner the better. We have had customers and members that we talked to last week and the week before about canceling meetings this week. So we will be following up with them to see how things turned out and create a best practice list. But there was another question that came in about a strategic plan. And the question is that they were talking to someone about getting together goals in terms of a crisis strategy. And it sounded a lot like a strategic plan. And what should we do with our strategic plan now? And how do I help my board focus moving forward? So that's an awesome one. I'll turn it over to Sharon and Abe, but I think what Abe just said, there's an opportunity now to maybe get things done that is definitely in line with your mission. But I'll pause there and let maybe Sharon go. She sounds like she wants to jump in here.
Well, I think that, you know, when we're in a crisis situation, we start talking about planning horizons and how, and you know, how far out we can plan. And I will say almost any planning will include goals and objectives and things we're talking about. So what makes a plan strategic versus not strategic? A scenario plan in my, you know, my book is strategic in nature, but it's not what associations think about as a strategic plan. So if you were, if it was time to update your strategic plan, if you're in strategic planning process, I would definitely continue that. I think what is going to be really interesting in the planning horizon, so a lot of associations will plan in a 3 to 5 year horizon. That's very typical. But I think our world is going to change in a shorter horizon than 3 years. And so I'm already starting to look at what experts and pundits are saying about what our life is going to be like post COVID-19. And so I think that's tremendously important input into strategic planning right now. So when you were talking about virtual meetings, Kevin mentioned the long runway. I think that virtual meetings are here now to stay. I don't think that face-to-face meetings right now are going away post COVID-19, but I think that that mandate to have virtual components is you know, obviously here. It takes a little bit of a runway to get ready for that and to build that revenue base. So it's something we'd get started on. That's the kind of thing that should show up in your strategic plan as one of your priorities are addressing, it will likely be addressing members and customers that aren't able to meet with you in a face-to-face environment or don't want to. So I think for strategic planning right now, I would, you know, depending on your scenario, what situation is, you might pull back on that activity because you don't have the finances to support it or to get the board together to do retreats or whatnot. But if you still have that possibility, it's probably more important now than ever to be having those strategic discussions about where the association is going, what's life going to look like after COVID-19, and how do we prepare the association to take advantage of the opportunities that presents.
Thanks. So,
do you see it differently? Is he there? No. Okay.
No, I think also the person who asked about the strategic plan, I think you can also realize that your plan needs to be more integrated with everything else. So that might be another session we might spin back up, is moving to integrated planning instead of just having the strategic plan stop at the operational level. They all need to be integrated with ops plan, resource plan, finance plan, and your IT plan.
So
let me go ahead, Sharon. I was just going to say that I think you need to recognize a couple of things. The traditional strategic planning process right now would take you probably more time than you're capable of devoting to it right now. So I wouldn't necessarily go into a full-blown strategic plan. I'm going to go to Sharon's presentation on scenario planning. That is much more effective because, let's be clear here, every forecast that you make is going to be wrong. It's just a matter of how wrong you are. So how close are you to where the, your expected outcome is going to be will start to drive your decisions. But you want to provide yourself flexibility that this is not a recipe. This is not something that you're following the steps in terms of, add these ingredients and you're going to come out with a finished product. You're going to, course correct almost on a daily basis. So the strategic planning is much more like scenarios that here is what, I learned today, here's what our response is going to be, and then modify and course correct continually. So the management and your attention to the data points, as we were talking about before, is really critical here in terms of what is it that's driving your business? What are those key indicators that you need to pay attention to and start to ignore some of the other ones so that you can facilitate the decisions and you're making it based on data. You're not making it based on heuristics or my gut feeling or this seems to be the right decision today. There has to be actual data to support your decision, and so therefore you're able to course correct and to see outcomes that are consistent with the information that you're receiving. So I wouldn't be overly concerned that either you do or you don't have a full-blown strategic plan. I would start to concentrate on sort of those mini planning scenarios right now on what could happen. And if you're able to take it down to a product level, you're better off than doing it at a macro organizational level. For example, doing it on events, doing it on your, your courseware, or doing it on membership. Take your particular products and do mini plans for those on what would happen if.
Before I ask the next question, if people have suggestions for topic ideas for our next session, please add those to the chat as we're kind of going through the questions. That would be helpful. So we want to make sure that we're providing content that is useful for you guys as we move along here the next couple weeks. So Abe, another question, and this might be different depending on the type of association, but Bernadette asked the question, are there any examples on how boards/committees are staying engaged in this new environment? Are committee meetings being held? Are board meetings being held or postponed? Now, I work with a lot of medical associations, so because of their, they're obviously on the front lines and their attention is somewhere else, they are reducing the amount of committee meetings. And of course, a lot of their board meetings were already virtual and, typically during the evening weekends. So they're just reducing the amount of time that they're meeting. But this may be different for, trade professional organizations. Do you have any thoughts on that, Abe?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the way that you developed the relationship and your communication sequencing with your board before. Drastic changes in your communication style could cause some uncertainty with the board as to whether you're capable of managing the situation. So you have to do it relative to, I think Kevin was pointing this out before, the culture, relationship that you've had and developed with your board. It may be difficult right now to change drastically, okay, I'm going to communicate with you on a daily basis where I only communicated with you on a monthly basis before, or vice versa, that I only need to communicate you when we make a huge decision as opposed to a more frequent communication channel. So a lot has to do with the type of, board member and the type of relationship that you've developed in the past. I'd say that you need to reach out to your chair and or your leadership team, depending on your circumstance. Find out what their sequence of, their preferred sequences of communication. And more importantly, use your volunteer leadership as conduits. They should be communicating out based on your strategies to volunteers and the like. So it doesn't seem like it's a one-way communication channel just from, the staff side. Incorporate the board, incorporate leadership, not only in terms of internal communication, but external communication as well, that you're demonstrating to your membership, both current and future members, that, we respect and we engage our membership in a variety of different ways. Obviously, it has to be relevant to your particular organization. I'm not suggesting that organizations, implement this immediately. If they've never done it in the past, it may seem as a schism. So assess your culture, assess your communication styles, and align it relative to sort of the situation that your members are facing. Healthcare workers need much more information today than I would say, I'm not going to pick an association, but there are more sort of timely and relevant associations in terms of communication than others.
Yep. All right, great. So another question Meg asked, are there examples of appropriate praise reward to staff who are working from home for an extended period of time? Any thoughts or ideas? Well, I will give you, I don't know if it's really praise or reward, but the Society of Academic Emergency Medicine yesterday told us about that they actually engaged a trainer, that they are inviting a virtual trainer for their staff and family and kids to do some low impact exercise classes online virtually. So I thought that was very unique and kind of fun to keep staff engaged and kind of positive. But frankly, I think we're all trying to figure out, that in terms of what's next. But I don't know, anybody on the line here have any other thoughts or anything that any of the participants, attendees are doing in their organizations?
Well, I think this is a tough one because I remember what we used to do is send, like $10 Starbucks coupons or whatever, but you're not going to Starbucks right now for the most part. But I think it's as important as rewards are in a way. I think empathy, showing that empathy to your staff and understanding, checking in with them, and having managers have a how are you conversation before jumping right into business, and keeping that personal connection right now, I think is critically important. I can imagine that a lot of staff are feeling very pulled in a million directions at home right now because they are trying to work and they're trying to take care of their family and do other things. So having managers and supervisors that are interested in how they're doing and how they're faring and just kind of express appreciation for that is, I think, critically important.
So we're doing virtual watercoloring sessions with large group Zoom meetings where people just chat for 10 minutes. That's fun. Somebody else wrote, we're doing spirit days, not water cooler chats. I said watercolor. Sorry about that. Water cooler chat. 10 minutes.
How you do that?
I guess that could reduce stress too, right? So, well, great. Well, we know this was a lot of content, and thanks for all of you that stayed on with us the whole time here. And just want to let you know, feel free to reach out. We're here for you. Some of you have already asked for some content from us directly, and we will follow up with you today on that. So feel free to reach out. We appreciate everybody's time, and thanks for your questions and for sharing.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.